Good morning. Welcome to this edition of San Diego People. Great to have you with us. I'm Logan Burns. The San Diego City Council recently approved new short-term vacation rental regulations by a vote of 6-2 in hopes of, they say, preserving San Diego neighborhoods. And while some are happy that something is being done about it, others are infuriated with the decision. So the new rules state that homeowners can only rent out their primary residence or a structure on that property for up to 6 months a year. They must also get a license and pay licensing fees that would then fund the enforcement of some new rules, and also pay a per night fee that will generate funding for affordable housing. Now, on Tuesday and Wednesday, Airbnb and HomeAway, as well as some other organizations, started a referendum effort to try and overturn the legislation by putting the issue to voters. And joining us now to discuss the issue is District 7 Councilmember Scott Sherman. He's been a vocal opponent of the new rules. We also did invite the other side of the issue, but unfortunately they were unable to attend, so I'll try to provide their point of view. So, Councilmember Sherman, thanks for being here. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Why don't you just tell us why you're so passionate about this issue, and why you think that there should not be these regulations governing these short-term vacation rentals?
First off, I think this is just a government overreach on people's property rights. I mean, if there are people for decades who have owned little vacation rentals down at the beach, rented them out, they depend on that income, it's their property, they've paid their taxes and done everything with it. And with a stroke of the pen, the government has come in and said, you can't do that anymore except under very, very strict circumstances, and basically taking that livelihood that they've depended on for decades away from them.
Mayor Faulconer proposed kind of a compromise, suggesting that it was similar to these rules, but that you could also have a second home if you wanted to rent out. How did that discussion go, and the fact that that wasn't adopted?
Yeah, that kind of went by the wayside when the discussion started to go. And at that point, even that was a compromise, because I mean, if I've worked hard my whole life and bought 2 or 3 little places down at the beach that I want to rent out month to month, or on a weekly basis, or vacation rental, I should have the ability to do that. But we were trying to get to a compromise, and the last vote before this one, we actually had a compromise in place that 4 council members signed on, but then 1 council member voted against their own measure. So it's been a very hot political football. One
of the council members who voted against your position is Lori Zaffin. We have a soundbite from her, and she basically lays out the position of that there should be some kind of regulations for these short-term vacation rentals.
Investors just started coming in like San Diego's a monopoly game and just buying up properties. It started as, oh, we want home sharing. You're not allowed to share a home. People should be able to make a little extra money. I agree with all that. And this proposal allows home sharing by right. You have to pay TOT and taxes, but by right. What the whole conversation has switched over to is like, suddenly they're coming in, no more talk about like home sharing. It's about, this is, you know, the American dream, and I bought these properties, and I'm entitled to do this, and it says it in the Constitution, which it, by the way, does not.
So what about the idea that people are kind of coming in from all over and they're buying up these little residential houses that generally would have gone to somebody who lives in San Diego, and now just vacationers are coming in, and it's kind of, it's taking over neighborhoods with these little mini hotels, is their argument?
Yeah. Most of the vacation rentals and most of the people we saw who were opposed to the vacation rental, the vast majority were from the beach area, where vacation rentals have existed for decades. I mean, when I was a kid, we used to go up and down the alley writing down property management company names so we could get one to go rent for the summer with our parents. Those things have existed for a long time. It's primarily a beach issue. And what we had in the first go-around that didn't pass was a very strict enforcement measure. Because too many times in government, instead of trying to enforce the issues that are already on the books with the bad apples who are causing the problem, we pass blanket bans, and that's what we've done in this instance. We didn't go after the code enforcement side of things.
Well, and I've heard the argument that this residential or these residential areas aren't zoned for this type of activity. You can't put a liquor store there, and you certainly can't put a small motel or hotel, and that's what these are kind of acting as when you have different people coming on sometimes a daily or a weekly basis.
Yeah, these are residential habitational units. In my opinion, there's no difference between a month-to-month home that is being rented out to somebody or somebody that's renting it out by the week. It's habitational units that are being rented out. And to use the argument that the other side likes to use about the destruction and quality of the neighborhood, we get way more complaints by month-to-month renters than we do by short-term vacation rentals. I mean, I can point out two in my neighborhood that are occupied by college kids. They don't start their night till 11 o'clock.
Sure. Well, that's exactly what they're saying, is all of a sudden my quiet little neighborhood is now turned into kind of a college fraternity party, and there's drinking and there's loud music. And what happened to, what about me? I live here and I need some peace and solitude. I got to go to work in the morning.
I can bring in just as many people who've had their vacation rentals going for a long time without any problems. The vast majority of the problems are created by the very few.
Okay.
There are a lot of people who manage and run their places very well, and their neighbors don't have any problems with them.
So what happens now? Where do you go now as far as the argument is concerned? And I know that you were involved, or at least you've signed on to this petition to try to get these new laws overturned.
Yeah, it's a referendum petition to say, wait a minute, that was wrong what you guys did. It was an illegal taking of property because you've allowed this to happen forever. Let's pull it back. Let's relook at the decision. Send it to the voters to see what they decide of the city as a whole, instead of letting certain communities dictate the rest of the city and what happens there. Or we can have a cooling off period of about a year to where we relook at this again. It depends on what the council decides.
Councilmember Scott Sherman, thanks for coming on the program.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to be talking to some specific individuals affected by this. We have a homeowner, says he's fed up with these vacationers taking over the neighborhood. We have a landlord, an investor, and a property manager depends on these vacation rentals for his livelihood. And we also have a real estate agent. She's going to provide some input as to how this subject, how this issue is affecting sales and rents, and also the housing inventory, when we come right back. Welcome back to San Diego People. I'm Logan Burns. So the recently passed short-term rental laws has really created some mixed reactions and concerns, and quite frankly, a lot of anger among those directly affected and related to this issue. So joining me now to share their point of view and how it affects them directly is David Austin with Save San Diego Neighborhoods, also Jonah Mechanic with Seabreeze Vacation Rentals, and we have real estate agent Melissa Tucci, who is also the official realtor to the San Diego Padres. Thanks for being on the program, the three of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
David, let's start with you. You're with Save San Diego Neighborhoods. I know that you really didn't like having these vacation rentals in your neighborhood. Tell us why, and why are you so passionate about trying to reduce the amount that they can be used?
Well, first of all, let me say that the charter, or the purpose of Save San Diego Neighborhoods, is to try to convince the city to enforce the municipal code. The municipal code states that short-term rentals are not a defined use in basically any zone in San Diego, but in particular in residential areas. So our position is that even though the new ordinance legalizes under restrictions short-term rentals for primary residences, we still believe that the better policy and the better solution would be to use the existing municipal code, and we will be working in that direction in the future.
What is it about these vacation rentals you don't like?
Well, there's two things. There's two major issues. The first major issue is that we get hundreds of calls and letters and pleas from people who are being evicted from their long-term residences. We have hundreds of people that have been evicted because houses are bought. Some of the property short-term managers bring in buyers from out of state, maybe out of the country. They buy a property, they evict the long-term residents. That happened on my block. And then they turn it into a short-term rental, which not only displaces a family that's already there, but also takes that house out of the housing stock in San Diego, which is a city that has been experiencing a chronic and critical housing crisis for decades. The second thing that happens is the other edge of the sword is that once the short-term rentals begin, then we get also hundreds of letters and calls from people that say their lives are really being upended by the fact that in general, people that come into these short-term rentals come in to have parties. We have bachelor parties. We have cases where there's a lot of drugs being used. We have cases where guys will come in and have escorts and people there. So it's a big disruption to.
Let's let Jonah Mechanic have his say. He's with Seabreeze Vacation Rentals. I know that you've got a lot of properties, and you must be furious that they're now trying to take away some of your livelihood here.
Yeah, I just want to confirm first and foremost, I'm here representing Share San Diego, which is an alliance of vacation rental manager properties throughout San Diego, local businesses, and individual hosts that partake in the sharing economy.
Sure.
You know, first and foremost, that's a lot of sound bites that we just heard. And we have been really strong proponents of data, more so than anything. So we've heard a lot. We hear a lot of investors coming in, buying up properties, multiple properties, converting them into mini hotels. But at the end of the day, what we really rely on data. We've yet to see the data for that. But more importantly, what we would like to stress is that there's a better way to control everything we just heard than a de facto ban. And I want to clarify that. What happened 2 weeks ago is a de facto ban. A primary residence only short-term regulation wipes out 97% of the inventory in Mission Beach. There are approximately 1,200 vacation rentals advertised in Mission Beach. Of those, only 57 would constitute as a primary resident. When you pass an ordinance that wipes out 97% of the vacation rental inventory in a particular area, that is a ban.
Sure.
And our personal approach is there is a better, more common sense way to solve the potential problems that are raised by short-term rentals in our community than an all-out ban.
What is it?
Well, we've been working on a compromise for quite some time. We've been working on a compromise with City Council. We've been working on a compromise with the Mayor's office, and we thought we were pretty close.
What would it be? What would be your compromise?
Well, you know, I can't go into the details exactly, but what I can tell you is that we feel that every property owner should be treated fairly and equally, and that there should be equal protection. If you own a property, no matter if you live there for 5 months or if you live there for 7 months, you should have the right to participate in the sharing economy. Should you as a property owner be able to go in and buy up multiple properties and get multiple short-term permits? No. As a guest, should you be able to go in to a residential neighborhood where your neighbor might have to wake up in the morning and take their kids to school or go to work, you should have to act in a way that abides to the standards of a residential neighborhood, but determining that a short-term renter that rents a house for 29 days is bad, but a long-term renter who rents a house for 31 days is going to be a good resident or a good guest. That's just an arbitrary number.
Sure. Melissa, let's get your take on what is this doing, if anything, to the real estate market? Are there some benefits and detriments to it? How do you see it?
So there's pros and cons, just like with everything. The biggest con I've seen, even firsthand with clients, is that people purchase properties based on a number that they're expecting from a revenue, monthly or even yearly.
Investment buyers.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Investment buyers. And when they're anticipating a certain amount, because when you do a daily or weekly or weekend amount, you typically get more than if you're just doing, you know, a month or a year rental. Those revenues are substantially, you know, declined and decreased, and people purchased at a higher price point because they expect to get that higher revenue. And so, for an example, I have a listing in the beach area that is being affected by this because they only do vacation rentals, and now people don't want to pay that price. On the flip side, you know, I do believe that people in residential neighborhoods don't sign up to live next to, you know, a Marriott per se, you know, where their school districts are ranked 10 and they're wanting to just have neighbors and people that they always know. So I agree on that respect,
Sure.
But I think there has to be a happy medium, and hopefully we can find it.
Are you finding that the home prices are higher than maybe they would normally otherwise be if the vacation rental was not an option for a potential buyer?
Absolutely, and I experience it firsthand. Daily.
In what way? Are you trying to show homes to potential buyers and the price is just too high because vacation renter investors are coming in and buying them?
So I work with both buyers and
Yeah.
sellers and investors, and just an example, there's a property that's on the market and they were doing vacation rentals estimating about $6,600 a month. If it wasn't going to be that, then the revenue would be closer to $4,000 a month, making then the price point that this potential buyer was willing to pay,
Yeah.
and now not offering because of what might happen.
So one argument is it's more difficult for people who live here in San Diego to actually find housing, whether you're renting or buying, because the prices are so high, because the home is essentially just for people coming in from out of town for a vacation rental.
Yeah, yes and no. It's
Okay.
mixed. It just depends. And again, it's location driven as well. But particular properties that are in a good location for people that want to be here from a rental and vacation perspective,
Sure.
those are being affected the most.
Jonah, I know one argument in favor of having these vacation rentals is that maybe people who can't afford a hotel room can then come in and stay at one of these vacation rentals, and then they can spend money in the community, at the bars, at the restaurants. And in that respect, it can also help the San Diego economy by having these vacation rentals.
Absolutely, especially in the beach areas. If you look at an area like La Jolla Shores, for example, there's 2 hotels in La Jolla Shores. Anyone familiar with the area knows one of them is the most expensive hotel in all of San Diego. Mission Beach. There are a total of 860 hotel rooms in Mission Beach. During the summertime, June, July, and August, they run at a 95 to 90% occupancy rate. On the flip side, there are 3,600 short-term rental rooms, not properties, but 3,600 short-term rental rooms available in Mission Beach. If 97% of that inventory goes away, what do you think is going to happen to the rates of the remaining 860 hotel rooms? We all know that the hotel prices are going to go through the roof. Most importantly, there's just not enough hotels to house the 35 million visitors that come to San Diego to visit our beaches and bays. We are, in essence, telling them, unless you want to pack your family into an overpriced tiny hotel room, you're no longer welcome here in San Diego. And I don't think that's a message that America's greatest city wants to portray to our visitors.
What about that aspect, David? Having these vacation rentals actually helps bring some people to the community that maybe couldn't otherwise afford a hotel, and that provides a benefit to everybody here in the economy.
San Diego is one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. I think it's a real stretch of the imagination to say that whether or not there's short-term rentals here will be a big factor in whether or not people come to San Diego for their vacations and for their leisure time. And plus which, if there's a shortage of hotels, then we should build more hotels. But it's a very poor solution to say that what we're going to do is we're going to decimate our neighborhoods just because we don't have enough hotel rooms yet. I mean, we can build hotels, we can, but turning my neighborhood into a hospitality zone just because there's not enough hotel rooms doesn't solve anything. And plus which, the transient occupancy tax that is estimated to derive from the short-term rentals is less than 2% of the revenue of the city, and it's going to cost much more than that to regulate and enforce this new ordinance that the council just passed. So
sounds like Jonah and people with his organization, they're trying to find a compromise. I know the mayor put forth a bit of a compromise, which was you can rent out your primary residence and one other. Do you see, I don't know if we can find a number right now, but do you see a little wiggle room where maybe you can come together and maybe you don't give them nothing, but you give them something, and they don't get everything?
I think the council just gave them everything. They said any person.
Well, it was just you could only rent out
can
your
rent
own
out their primary residence.
Yeah.
I think that was a huge gift, considering that.
I don't think Jonah thinks that's a huge gift.
If it wipes out 80% of the short-term rental stock across all of San Diego, how is that a compromise? Yeah. Saying that the only way that you can participate in the sharing economy is if you happen to be a primary resident. Plus, I'd like to add to that, just again.
Okay, do it fast, please.
I will do it fast, no problem.
Thank you.
If you are a primary resident, you live in your house for 6 months and a day by default. That means you have another 6 months to rent it out as a short-term rental. What's to say that for the other 6 months you're going to rent to good tenants? What's to say they're not going to continue to party and have these issues? This is an issue of enforcement and having funding for enforcement. We are in agreement. No one should come into a residential neighborhood and disrupt the neighbors. Yeah. But in order to enforce that, the city needs funding and they need a regulatory framework that is actually enforceable. This is not enforceable, and most importantly, it doesn't solve the problem of noise and nuisance. All it does is say if you have a bad neighbor, they can only be a bad neighbor for 6 months instead of 12 months, but the noise and nuisance is still a factor that we all want to come together and address.
We've got to leave it there. We're going to talk about enforcement coming up, but thank you so much. David Austin, Jonah Mechanic, and Melissa Tucci. Thank you so much. Easy for me to say. Thank you for coming on the program. All right, still ahead right here on San Diego People. The battle may have been over right now, but the war is continuing. So we're going to talk about some more obstacles. We're going to have a former city attorney on to talk more about the legality of all this when we come back. Welcome back to San Diego People. I'm Logan Burns. And despite the approval of the short-term rental regulations, more issues have been brought to the forefront for the City Council. And joining me now to talk about what's next for the new plan and also to provide some legal perspective is former City Attorney Jan Goldsmith. And full disclosure, Jan, you represented Airbnb recently on one specific issue, right? But that was just a one-time...
Yes, at one hearing
Okay.
to raise some issues with the City Council. I do not represent them any longer, but we need to have full
Sure.
disclosure.
You can be impartial for the next 5 minutes on the show?
I will be impartial the next 5 minutes,
Okay.
but that was the whole thing. I just went in front of council for one hearing.
Okay, terrific. Okay, let's talk about, how about this referendum first and foremost, because this is happening recently, and it sounds like these people who are against the new laws kind of banning these vacation rentals are really upping their game, and they're trying to get this maybe on a ballot soon.
It's a challenge. They need to get 36,000 verified signatures of registered voters within 30 days. That's a lot. Think about that. That's more than 1,000 a day.
Yeah.
Normally, if you have to get a lot more because to make up for those that aren't really valid registered voters, probably need about 50,000 at least signatures in 30 days. That's going to be very challenging. But if they are able to get that, then the City Council has the authority to decide whether to rescind the ordinance, go back to square one. They cannot adopt something that's substantially similar for a year, or go to a vote of the people to decide whether this ordinance goes in effect. During the time before a vote, once they get the signatures, the ordinance is frozen.
The articles I've read said that they probably can't get it on this November ballot. If anything, it would be 2020. We'll have to see what happens. Let's talk about the enforcement of this, because there's a lot of people who say, okay, they've got their laws, but how can you prevent somebody from still renting out their second home as a vacation rental and just saying, well, that's my friend who's staying there, that's my Aunt Millie, or what have you?
Well, first of all, the ordinance applies to occupancy, not just rental. It's a much broader ordinance than one that I've ever seen. So whether it applies to Antilles or not, the fact is that people being there as guests, you've got some application of the ordinance.
Is it going to be tough to enforce this, you think?
Yes, it's going to be tough to enforce it, but they also have an enforcement mechanism in there. They have a fee that would be charged to those who do either rent or allow occupancy of their units. They've estimated it to be over $900 a year, and they're expecting to raise enough money to have law enforcement police, to have city attorney's office, have investigators, and have a good response. Now, a lot of that enforcement is geared toward enforcing bad behavior, enforcing the law against bad behavior. That's good. That's what has made people so frustrated about these, is the bad apples, whether it's just a small minority or whether there's more. But this was first raised 11 years ago, and they haven't done anything. All of a sudden now they're trying to do a lot. So that's where the enforcement comes from. There is money in this ordinance.
There have been some who have said that just by the council doing this and making this proclamation, these new rules, that it was just illegal to do that. It's essentially a taking of these people's property by saying you're not allowed to do what you're doing with these vacation rentals.
There are a lot of legal issues involved in this ordinance, some of which are constitutional issues that could go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. When I gave my presentation to council, I said, the mayor had a compromise proposal that didn't have these type of issues. And in fact, Airbnb supported the compromise, which is one of the reasons I was there. And you could actually get something in place that likely wouldn't be challenged.
You think we'll see some lawsuits on this, and it's not going to be?
I don't have inside information on that. But from the accounts that I see, it's likely you'll have three ways of attacking it. One is the referendum, the other may be lawsuits, and the other is the Coastal Commission, which did support, by the way, the mayor's compromise proposal. Well, but this seems to be a little bit different than what they've normally approved.
All right.
However, let's be clear.
We're going to have to wrap it up
City Council
here.
has this is the policy they want.
Yep.
And they're going to stick at it, and they're going to do their very best to implement it.
Former City Attorney Jan Goldsmith. Thank you, sir. Appreciate
you.
Okay. That's going to do it for this morning's edition of San Diego people, we appreciate you being with us. Join us tonight for the KUSI News at 6, 10, and 11. And until then, we'll see you next time. This week on San Diego People, the City Council's latest decisions to help preserve local neighborhoods may have helped some, but others infuriated with that decision are taking legal action to fight back. What's next for short-term vacation rentals this Sunday at 11 a.m.